The chair cracked. Not a small sound. Not a polite little groan that only the person sitting in it could hear. It was loud enough to cut through the music. Loud enough to stop two waiters mid-step. Loud enough to make every head at the nearby tables turn at exactly the same moment. Clara froze. She felt the crack before she heard it, felt the shift in the plastic beneath her, and her entire body went rigid as she grabbed the edge of the table and steadied herself before the chair could fully give way. She sat very still. She breathed through her nose. She kept her eyes forward, on the centerpiece, on the flowers, on anything except the faces turning toward her. But she could not stop herself from hearing them. The laughter started low. It was the worst kind of laughter, the kind people try to swallow but cannot quite manage, the kind that leaks out through pressed lips and shaking shoulders. Someone at the bridesmaids' table did not even try to hide it. A sharp, clean laugh, the kind that had a target. Should have brought a reinforced seat for her, one of them said. Clara did not look. She had learned years ago that looking only made it worse, that meeting the eyes of someone who was laughing at you gave them something extra, gave them the satisfaction of knowing the arrow had landed. So she kept her gaze on the flowers. Pink roses, white ribbon wrapped around the vase. Someone had tied the ribbon in a bow that was slightly uneven on the left side. She focused on the bow. She breathed. Clara had been the heaviest girl in every room she had ever walked into, for as long as she could remember. She had been the heaviest in her primary school classroom, the heaviest among her cousins at Christmas, the heaviest at her college graduation, and tonight, she was the heaviest at her childhood friend Nadia's wedding reception. She had known this before she arrived. She had stood in front of her mirror for 40 minutes before leaving her flat, turning sideways, adjusting the green dress she had bought 2 weeks ago specifically for this night. The dress was lovely. She had felt lovely in it, for exactly 40 minutes, before she stepped out the door. The feeling had not survived the first hour. It rarely did. Nadia had been her closest friend since they were 11 years old, sitting beside each other in a geography class neither of them cared about, passing notes about which teacher had the strangest walk. They had grown up together, laughed together, cried through breakups and bad years together. When Nadia had called her 8 months ago to say she was getting married and that Clara was invited, Clara had felt genuine happiness, real, warm, uncomplicated joy for her friend. She still felt that joy. It sat in her chest alongside something heavier and harder, something she had no clean name for. She had smiled through the ceremony. She had clapped at the right moments. She had told Nadia she looked breathtaking, and she meant it, because Nadia did, in a way that seemed effortless and whole and like belonging. Clara had sat in the third row and watched Nadia walk toward the man who loved her, and she had thought, I want that, someday, someone who looks at me the way he is looking at her right now. Then the reception started, and the chair cracked, and she stopped thinking about someday. The waiter appeared beside her with a new chair, a sturdier one, and he placed it without comment, without even meeting her eyes. She appreciated that. She moved to it carefully, sat down with the precision of someone who had learned to be precise, and she picked up her fork and looked at her plate and told herself to eat. She was not hungry anymore. Across the room, the bridesmaid who had laughed, a tall woman named Gemma with perfect posture and a voice that carried, was whispering to the woman beside her. Clara did not need to hear the words. She had heard versions of those words her entire life. She had a working knowledge of exactly what was being said, the words chosen, the gestures accompanying them. A hand held out at a certain width, eyes cutting briefly across the room toward her, and then away. She put a piece of chicken in her mouth and chewed. Her mother had always told her to rise above it. Her mother, a small, narrow woman who had never once struggled with her weight, had given this advice with the complete confidence of someone who had no idea what she was talking about. Rise above it, Clara. Ignore them, Clara. You have so much to offer, Clara. As if the problem was simply that Clara had not yet considered the option of not being bothered. As if she had spent 31 years choosing to feel this way. She swallowed the chicken. She drank some water. Gemma laughed again, and this time Clara heard the specific sound of her own name in the middle of it. It was unmistakable. The shape of 2 syllables she had been hearing her whole life, landing in someone else's mouth like a punchline. She set her fork down. She set it down carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady and you do not want anyone to know that. She pressed her fingers flat on the tablecloth for a moment. Then she stood, smoothed the green dress over her hips, and walked toward the doors that led to the garden. She walked slowly. She had also learned that. Never rush. Rushing made it look like fleeing. She was not fleeing. She was simply going to get some air. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, and the music from inside became muffled the moment the door swung closed behind her. Clara stood on the stone steps of the venue and breathed. The garden stretched out ahead of her, lit by small white lights strung between posts, flower beds on either side of a narrow path. It was a beautiful venue. Nadia had chosen well. Clara walked down the path. She had no destination in mind. She just needed to move, needed to put some distance between herself and the sound of that laughter, needed a few minutes where no one was looking at her, no one was calculating, no one was passing judgment on the space her body occupied. She reached the white fence at the far end of the garden and stopped. Beyond it was more garden, darker, less decorated, clearly belonging to a neighboring property. She stood at the fence and looked out at the dark and tried to decide what she felt. Sad was too simple a word. Tired was closer. She was tired in a way that went past the physical, a tiredness that lived somewhere behind her ribs and had been living there for years. She had stopped counting the number of times she had been in this exact position. Not this garden, not this fence, but this feeling. The feeling of standing just outside the bright room, just outside the circle of warmth and acceptance, looking in from a distance that no one else seemed to notice. She had jobs she was good at. She worked in publishing, had been a senior editor for 3 years, and she was excellent at her work. She had a flat she loved, with bookshelves she had built herself, and a kitchen where she cooked real meals. She had friends, real ones, people who called on her birthday and remembered the small things she mentioned in passing. She had a full life, a genuinely full life. And still there were chairs that cracked, and women who laughed, and names spoken like punchlines, and a weight she carried that had nothing to do with her body. She leaned against the fence post and closed her eyes. Inside, they were probably dancing now. Nadia was probably spinning on the floor with her new husband, her dress fanning out around her, everyone watching and smiling. Clara would go back in a few minutes. She would smile. She would toast the couple. She would do what she always did, which was show up and keep showing up, because the alternative was giving the cruelty a victory it had not earned. But right now she needed 2 more minutes. She opened her eyes and looked at the dark garden beyond the fence. Something moved in the shadows near the far hedge, and she squinted, and a man stepped into the edge of the light. He was tall. She registered that first. Then the dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open at the top, as if formality had simply run its course sometime earlier in the evening. He was standing very still, the way people stand when they have been somewhere for a while and are comfortable with being there, not hiding but not advertising himself either. He looked at her. She looked at him. Sorry, she said, not entirely sure what she was apologizing for. Trespassing on a private moment, maybe. His or hers, she was not sure. He shook his head slightly. You all right? His voice was calm. Not soft exactly, but level. The kind of voice that did not go up at the end of questions to make them sound friendlier. It just asked. She opened her mouth to say yes. The word was right there. She had said it 1,000 times in exactly this tone, in exactly this kind of moment. Yes, fine, totally fine, just getting some air. Not particularly, she said instead. He did not respond immediately. He looked at her for a moment in a way that felt neither intrusive nor dismissive, and then he nodded once, as if that was a completely reasonable answer. Okay, he said. That was all. She turned back to look at the dark garden. He stayed where he was. And somehow, with a stranger standing quietly a few feet away in the dark, with the muffled music from inside, and the cool night air, and the white lights behind her, Clara felt the tight thing in her chest loosen, just slightly, just enough. She did not know his name. She did not know anything about him. She did not know that the men positioned along the perimeter of that garden were there because of him. She did not know that 2 governments in different countries kept files with his name on them. She did not know that the calm in his voice was the calm of a man who had seen enough of the world's worst to no longer be rattled by most of it. She knew he had a quiet voice, and had not laughed when he looked at her. Tonight, in this garden, against this fence, that was enough to make her breathe again. She stayed outside, a little longer than 2 minutes. The music played on. Inside, a chair sat empty at a table set for celebration, and no one came to check on the woman who had left. Out here, at least, no one was laughing. She breathed the night air in, and out, and in again. She would go back inside in a moment. She would smile and toast and do all the things she always did. But first, one more breath. Just one. The man on the other side of the fence stood quietly. He did not move away. Clara had walked back inside with her chin level and her shoulders back, because she had practiced that walk for years, and it had become part of her now. A kind of armor she could put on even when everything beneath it was still shaken. She had smiled at Nadia across the room. Nadia had waved from the dance floor, and the sight of her friend's happy face was enough to make Clara feel something genuine again. A small, warm pulse of joy that cut through the residue of what had happened by the fence. She had gone back to her table. She had drunk half a glass of water, and watched the dancing, and told herself the evening was salvageable. Then Gemma found her again. It was not even subtle. Gemma crossed the room with 2 of the other bridesmaids trailing behind her like punctuation, and she stopped beside Clara's chair, and she smiled the way a person smiles when they are not actually offering warmth but rather performing the shape of it. "Clara, you came back," Gemma said. "I did," Clara said. "We were worried. You'd gone home." Gemma glanced at the woman beside her, and something passed between them. A look, the kind that had a whole conversation inside it. "You looked a little overwhelmed earlier." "I was getting some air." "Of course." Gemma's smile did not change. "Good idea. The dress is lovely, by the way. Green is brave." Clara looked at her. Brave was not a compliment, and both of them knew it. The woman beside Gemma, a thin person named Laura whose main personality trait appeared to be agreeing with Gemma, pressed her lips together in a small, suppressed smile. Clara set her glass down. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even. It gave nothing. She had learned that too, the art of responding without giving the other person anything to hold. Gemma searched her face for a flinch, and found none, and something shifted in her expression. A slight narrowing, a recalibration. "You should come dance," Gemma said. "It would be fun." She said it the way you say something when you do not mean it, when the invitation is its own kind of cruelty, because everyone in the circle knows the invitation is not real. "I'm fine here. Thank you," Clara said. Gemma shrugged. She said something else, low and half turned away, and Laura laughed quietly. Clara did not catch the exact words. She did not need to. She kept her eyes on the dance floor, on Nadia spinning with her husband, and she breathed slowly, and told herself that these 2 women were a small and temporary thing, and her friend's happiness was real, and she was here for the real thing. She held on to that. She held it very tightly. She was still holding it when she heard Gemma say it loudly enough for the table beside them to hear. Honestly, the only thing getting carried down that aisle would have been the buffet table. The table beside them laughed. A couple of people. Not everyone, but enough. Clara stood up. She did not rush. She picked up her small bag from the back of the chair. She smoothed her dress. She walked away from the table with the same even, practiced walk, chin level, shoulders back, and she did not look at Gemma, and she did not look at the laughing table, and she did not let her face do anything she would be ashamed of later. She walked past the bar and past the gift table, and through the main doors, and out into the car park. The night air hit her like cold water, and she stopped walking, and stood very still on the tarmac, with the lights of the venue behind her, and the dark of the car park ahead, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and breathed. She was not going to cry in a car park. She was not. She breathed again. Footsteps behind her, even and unhurried. She turned, expecting a waiter, expecting someone come to call a cab, expecting anything, except the man from the garden. He had come around from the side of the building, his jacket still on, his hands in his pockets, and he stopped when he saw her turn. He looked at her face the way someone looks when they are reading a situation quickly and accurately. "Car park this time," he said. It was not quite a joke. It was something quieter than a joke. An acknowledgement. An extension of the conversation they had started at the fence without actually starting it. "Better air out here," she said. He walked toward her slowly, not rushed, and stopped a few feet away. He was closer in the light of the car park than he had been in the dark of the garden, and she could see him more clearly now. Strong, even features. Dark eyes, with the particular quality of eyes that have learned to observe without revealing. He was not young, but he was not old. There was something about the way he stood that suggested he had never once been uncertain about where to put his hands or where to direct his attention. He was simply present, fully and without effort. "You were in there a long time," he said, "after the garden. You noticed." "I was still outside." She looked at him. "Why?" He considered the question. "I prefer outside." She almost smiled. It was not funny exactly, but it was honest. And honesty had been in short supply this evening. "I should get a cab," she said. "Where are you going?" "Home." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I can take you." She looked back at him. Every reasonable thought she had said no. You do not get into a car with a stranger in a car park at night. That was not a complicated rule. It was not a debatable rule. It was simply common sense, and Clara had always been a person of common sense. "I don't know your name," she said. "Dante," he said. "Dante Reyes." She waited for more. He did not offer more. Just his name, given cleanly, without explanation. "Clara," she said. He nodded. He pulled out his phone, opened something on the screen, and turned it toward her. It was a contact card. His name, a number, an address in the center of the city. He was not hiding who he was, or where he was from. He was offering information the way a person offers information, when they want you to feel you have enough to make a decision. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at him. "Your car," she said. He tilted his head toward a black car at the far end of the car park. Long, dark, quietly expensive, in the way expensive things often were when they were not trying to show off. She should call a cab. She knew she should call a cab. She looked back at the venue doors. Through the glass, she could see the lights of the reception, the moving shapes of people dancing, the distant sound of music. Somewhere in there was Gemma, still standing at someone else's table, still performing something that wore the mask of humor. She looked at Dante Reyes. "Okay," she said. She did not know, walking across that car park, that the man beside her had a name that made certain people in certain cities go very quiet. She did not know that the driver who stepped out of the black car when they approached had been with Dante for 11 years, and would not flinch at anything. She did not know that her getting into this car was the beginning of something that would rearrange the entire architecture of her life. She knew the seat was warm when she sat in it, and the door closed with a sound like something solid and safe clicking into place. Dante got in beside her. The car moved. She looked out the window at the city unfolding in slow streaks of light. He reached forward, opened the small compartment between the seats, and placed a bottle of water on her knee without saying anything. She looked at it. She looked at him. He was watching the road. She picked up the water and held it in both hands and felt, for the first time all evening, that the temperature of the world had shifted slightly in her direction. She did not speak. Neither did he. The city moved past outside the glass, and somewhere behind them the wedding venue grew smaller, and the laughter inside it grew quieter, and Clara sat in the warmth of the car, and breathed without counting, and did not feel, for the first time in hours, like someone standing just outside the light. She woke up in a bed that was not her own. That was the first thing. The ceiling was the wrong color, a pale, warm gray instead of the white she was used to. The pillow was too good, the kind of pillow that had clearly cost more than her monthly electricity bill. The duvet was heavy and soft in a way that made it difficult to feel alarmed immediately, which was probably how she had slept as long as she had. She sat up. The room was large and simply furnished. A wardrobe, a bedside table with a lamp, A window with curtains that were very good at their job of keeping morning out. There was a glass of water on the bedside table. She stared at it. Someone had put it there. She was still wearing her green dress. She breathed. She remembered. The car park. Dante Reyes. The drive through the city, where she had not spoken, and neither had he. Arriving at a building she had registered as tall and central and quiet. An elevator that opened directly into a flat that was not designed for showing off, but which communicated, without any effort at all, that the person who lived in it had never once had to worry about money. She remembered him pointing to a hallway, saying the second door, and she had walked down it, and found this room, with the lamp already on, and she had sat on the bed meaning to rest for just a moment. That was the last thing she remembered. She stood up, straightened her dress, found a door that led to a bathroom tiled in dark stone, with thick white towels folded on a rail, and a basket on the counter with sealed toothbrushes and small soaps, and the kind of thoughtful, prepared guest supplies that people only kept if guests were part of a regular pattern. She washed her face. She used one of the toothbrushes. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, her eye makeup slightly smudged, her hair a little loose, and she felt surprisingly steady. She went looking for him. The hallway led to a large open kitchen and sitting room. The whole far wall was glass, floor to ceiling, and through it the city spread out below in the early morning light, gray and gold and vast and moving. She stopped when she saw it. She had lived in this city for 9 years, and she had never seen it from this angle, from this height, this quiet. Coffee? She turned. Dante was standing at the kitchen counter, his jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, 2 mugs beside him. He looked exactly as composed as he had the night before, which she found slightly unreasonable at this hour. "Please," she said. She sat at the counter on one of the high stools, and he set a mug in front of her. "Good coffee. The real kind." "You didn't have to give me a room," she said. "You fell asleep in the car," he said, "before we reached the building." She felt a small heat in her face. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He sat on the other side of the counter with his own mug. "You clearly needed it." She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at him. In the morning light she could see him more clearly than she had in any of the previous encounters. He was somewhere in his early 40s, she thought, or he carried himself like a man in his early 40s even if the number was slightly different. There was a stillness to him that was not coldness. It was more like someone who had decided, at some point, to stop performing ease and simply be it. "I don't normally do this," she said. "Get into cars with strangers?" "Get into cars with strangers. Fall asleep in their cars. Wake up in their guest rooms." "Good," he said. "You shouldn't." She looked at him. "Then why did I say yes?" He turned the mug in his hands once. "Because you'd had a terrible night, and you wanted it to stop." It was the most accurate sentence anyone had spoken to her in years. She sat with it for a moment. "Who are you?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "I told you my name." "That's not what I mean." He was quiet for a beat. The kind of quiet that was not avoidance but consideration. The kind that preceded honesty rather than replacing it. "I work outside of conventional structures," he said. "I make arrangements between parties who cannot make those arrangements through official channels. I have operated this way for 14 years. There are people who would like to ask me questions I will not answer, in several countries. I am not a violent person by preference, but I am not a person who is afraid of what the world contains." She processed this slowly, sipping her coffee. "So when people say the word mafia," she said carefully. "People say many words," he said. "Most of them are trying to find a simple name for something that isn't simple." She nodded once. She was not sure what she had expected. She was not sure why she was not more frightened. Maybe because he had said it all with the same level voice, with no performance, with nothing that asked her to be impressed or afraid. Just facts, given cleanly. "Why were you at that garden last night?" she said. "At a wedding venue?" "The property next door belongs to someone I know. I was there for a meeting that ended early." He paused. "I prefer the garden to the house." "You mentioned that," she said. "The preferring outside." "Yes." She looked at her coffee. Then she looked up at him. "Why did you bring me here, Dante? Honestly." He held her gaze. "Because you were standing in a car park at night, with the face of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time, he said, and because it seemed like the least that could be done was to offer you somewhere to put it down. The city glittered outside the glass wall. She did not say anything for a moment. She breathed. She felt the truth of what he'd said settle into her in layers, not all at once but one layer at a time, the way something true tends to arrive. "I have to go home," she said eventually. "Whenever you're ready." She was not ready immediately. She finished the coffee. Then she accepted a second cup, and in the space of that second cup, with the morning light strengthening across the city, and the silence comfortable in a way she had not expected silence with a near stranger to be, she stayed. She told him something about herself. He told her something back. The conversation that began had no agenda and no performance in it, and it moved between her work and his philosophy, and a memory she had of her father teaching her to read in a kitchen that smelled like bread. And by the time she finally stood and said she truly needed to get home, 2 hours had passed, and she had forgotten, entirely, to feel like too much. He walked her to the elevator. The driver from the night before, a quiet man named Owen, who moved with the ease of someone used to waiting and going unnoticed, was already downstairs. At the elevator door, Dante looked at her. "You'll be all right," he said. Not a question, more like something he had decided on her behalf with confidence. She stepped into the elevator. The door closed. She stood in the mirrored interior as it descended and looked at her own reflection, and noticed, for the first time, that she was not holding her shoulders the way she usually held them at the end of a hard night. She was not braced. She was not compressed inward. She was just standing, in her green dress, in a mirrored elevator, early on a Sunday morning, with the faint smell of good coffee still with her. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if she would see him again. She did not know what his world actually looked like up close, or whether it was something she could stand beside without flinching. What she knew was that a man had looked at her last night in a car park and had not measured her, had not calculated, had offered her a simple, practical kindness without requiring anything from her in exchange. She knew she had slept, really slept, for the first time in longer than she could immediately remember. The elevator reached the ground floor. She walked out into the morning. Owen was already holding the car door open. She got in, and the city moved around her, and somewhere far behind her was a wedding venue where a chair had cracked and women had laughed, and her name had been used as a punchline. It felt very far away now. It felt, for the first time, like something that had happened to a version of her that was smaller than she actually was. 3 months passed. She did not expect them to. After that Sunday morning, Clara had gone home and sat in her kitchen and made herself a very ordinary cup of tea and had a very ordinary conversation with herself about what had happened and what it meant and what the sensible thing to do was. She had concluded, after approximately 2 cups of tea and a walk around her flat, that it had been an unusual evening, that Dante Reyes was an unusual man, and that the sensible thing was to file it under strange and beautiful and gone and move forward with her life. He called that afternoon. Not a long call. He asked if she had got home safely. She said yes. He said good. Then he asked if she would have dinner with him the following Friday, and there was nothing complicated in the way he asked it, no game in it, just the question. Direct and clear. She said yes. She was not sure she had ever said yes to anything so quickly. The dinner was in a small restaurant she had never heard of, in a street she did not know existed, and the food was extraordinary, and the table was quiet, and they talked for 3 hours without once running out of things to say. She told him about her work, about the manuscripts she loved and the ones she fought for, about what it meant to find a story that deserved to exist, and help it reach the hands of the person who needed it. He listened in a way she was not used to people listening, fully, and without looking elsewhere, as if her words were information he intended to keep. He told her things about himself slowly, in the way he did everything, without rush. He told her he had grown up with very little, and had spent his adult life making sure he would never have very little again, and that the methods he had used for this were not legal, in the traditional sense, but were governed by a strict code of his own, that he had never once broken. He told her he had lost his younger brother when they were both teenagers, and that this was the fact that had most shaped everything that came after. He said it simply. He did not elaborate in the same breath. She did not push. She had learned, in 3 months of knowing him, that Dante gave things at his own pace, and that the pace was worth waiting for. They had dinner twice more that month, and then a fourth time, and somewhere in the middle of the fourth dinner she had looked across the table at him and thought, quietly and without drama, that she was in serious trouble, the kind of trouble that had nothing to do with fear. He drove her home that night, and walked her to her building door, and looked at her for a moment in the orange light of the street lamp, and said, "I want you to understand who I am, before this goes any further." She said, "I understand who you are." He said, "You understand the outline. I want you to understand the detail." She said, "Then tell me the detail." He did, over the following weeks. Not everything. She understood that some things had weights he would not put on her, but enough. Enough that she walked into what they were becoming with her eyes completely open, knowing the shape of his world, and the risks that came with it, and the particular discipline required to stand beside a man like him without disappearing into his shadow. She did not disappear. That was the thing that surprised her most. She had spent so many years making herself smaller, taking up less space, apologizing for her presence in rooms. With Dante, she never once felt the pull to shrink. He was not interested in a smaller version of her. He was interested in her entirely, all of her, the full and complicated and imperfect fact of her. He told her this once, late at night on the sofa in his flat with the city below the glass wall doing its patient, glittering work. "You are exactly the right amount," he said. Not romantic in the conventional sense. He was not a man who reached for conventional, but she had sat with those 5 words for days afterward, and felt them press against every place she had been bruised. The trouble, when it came the way trouble usually did, from a direction she had not been watching. His world had its own hierarchies, its own politics, its own people who had opinions about what he did, and who he did it with. Clara had been aware of this abstractly. It became concrete on a Thursday evening when she came to his flat, and found 2 men in suits sitting in the living room who stopped talking when she walked in, and looked at her with the specific expression of people who have already formed a conclusion and are merely performing the courtesy of not stating it immediately. Dante introduced them briefly. Associates. Old ones, by the ease with which they occupied his space. One of them, a man named George, gray-haired, and with the manner of someone who had been important for long enough to have stopped needing to prove it, nodded at her once, and said nothing, but she felt the assessment. She felt it move over her from head to toe, measuring, calculating, arriving at some conclusion she was not invited to hear. She smiled at him. She smiled at him with everything she had, the full, warm, professional smile she used when dealing with authors who were convinced their work was perfect, and needed to be guided carefully toward the truth. It was a formidable smile. George blinked. She went to the kitchen and made tea. She heard them resume talking. Low, the words not landing clearly, but the tone clear enough. Something was being said that was not for her ears. She focused on the kettle and did not strain to hear. Later, after they left, Dante came into the kitchen and stood beside her. "George thinks I'm distracted," he said. "Are you?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Productively." She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh. It came out before she could calibrate it, genuine and full. He watched her laugh, and something in his face changed in a small way she had learned to notice. "He doesn't think I'm suitable," she said, not a question. "George has opinions about everything," Dante said. "He has been having opinions since 1987, and none of them have stopped anything from happening." She nodded. She sipped her tea. She noted that Dante had not said George was wrong, had not defended her in the conventional way, had not performed reassurance. He had simply placed George and his opinions accurately in the scale of things. It was enough. The more formal entry into his world came the following month, at an event she understood was significant, not a social event in the casual sense, something between a gathering and a statement, a room full of people who all existed in the same gray space between legal and extra-legal, who all spoke the same careful language and understood the same unspoken rules. He told her it was her choice entirely. She chose to go. She wore a dark blue dress she had bought for the occasion. Fitted, clean-lined, no apology in it. She had stood in front of the mirror before leaving, and had not spent 40 minutes adjusting and second-guessing. She had stood for perhaps 10 minutes, looked at herself clearly, and thought, "This will do. This is good. I am good." The event was held in a private room on the top floor of a building in the center of the city. The room was all dark wood and low light, and the kind of quiet that expensive rooms have when the people in them are used to keeping their voices measured. There were perhaps 40 people, men and women, most of them older, most of them carrying the particular air of people who operated largely outside of ordinary life. Dante walked in with his hand at the small of her back, and Clara walked beside him, and felt the room's attention shift the way a body of water shifts when something new enters it. She felt the calculations starting. She kept her chin level, and her face open, and she did not look for the exits. A woman named Helen, somewhere in her 60s, with very good shoes and eyes that missed very little, came to speak to them early in the evening. She spoke to Clara directly, with genuine curiosity rather than assessment, asking about her work, her background, responding to the answers with real engagement. Clara liked her. Not everyone was Helen. There was a man named Patrick who shook Dante's hand and nodded at Clara with the particular nod that said she was furniture, present but not addressed. There was a woman, with cropped blonde hair, who looked at Clara's figure with an expression she recognized from 100 rooms and 100 years of practice. There was a group near the far window who glanced over periodically with the studied casualness of people conducting an ongoing evaluation. Clara had lived her entire life being evaluated. She knew how to stand in the middle of it. She talked to Helen. She talked to 2 other people who approached genuinely. She stood beside Dante when it was appropriate, and across the room from him when that was more natural, because she was not the kind of woman who needed to stay within arm's reach to feel secure, and he was not the kind of man who required that of her. She was midway through a conversation about the publishing industry with a quietly spoken man named Charles when she heard it. Not loud, not theatrical. A comment made in the murmur register, the one designed to carry just far enough, the one she had been hearing in various rooms since she was a child. The woman with the cropped blonde hair, talking to Patrick, her voice low and shaped precisely to reach. "What is he thinking?" the woman said. "She is not exactly—" And then a pause, and a small sound that was not a word, a sound that did its own work. Clara went still. Not with hurt, though the hurt was there. She went still with something that had been building for 3 months, something that had been collecting quietly in all the spaces where other people had laughed and calculated and found her wanting, something that had been patient for a long time. She turned. She looked directly at the woman with the cropped blonde hair. The woman looked back, caught. Clara held the eye contact for 3 full seconds. She did not smile. She did not look away first. The woman looked away. Clara turned back to Charles and continued the sentence she had been in the middle of. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. She felt Dante beside her before she saw him. He had moved across the room without apparent hurry and was standing at her shoulder. "Ready to leave?" he said. "5 more minutes," she said. "Charles was about to tell me about a writer he knows in Edinburgh." Dante looked at Charles. "Carry on," he said. Charles carried on. 5 minutes later, they stepped into the elevator, just the 2 of them, and Clara stood in the mirrored interior and looked at her own reflection and breathed out slowly. "You heard," she said. "Yes," he said. "What will you do about it?" The elevator descended. "Nothing," he said. "You handled it." She looked at him in the mirror. "She's not wrong that I don't fit the expected shape of your world," Clara said. He turned to look at her directly, not at the reflection. "There is no expected shape," he said. "I define what belongs in my world." The elevator reached the ground floor. The door opened. She stepped out. Owen was waiting at the car. The night was cold and clear, and the city was lit in every direction, and she stood on the pavement for 1 moment and breathed it in. She thought about a wedding reception 3 months ago. A cracked chair, a woman's laugh, her own name turned into something small. She thought about where she was standing now. She got in the car. The night of the gala came on a Saturday in early spring. It was the kind of event that required formal dress and a particular bearing, an annual gathering held in a venue that had seen 100 years of significant evenings. Clara had been told about it 6 weeks in advance. She had time to prepare. Not just the dress, not just the logistics, but herself. The interior kind of preparation that mattered more. She had chosen a deep red dress, floor length, simple in cut, striking in color. She had bought it without apology, and without 40 minutes of mirror reconsideration. She had stood in the shop and looked at herself and thought yes, and bought it, and that had been the end of the deliberation. Dante had seen her before they left his flat that evening, and had gone quiet in a particular way he had. A quality of stillness that she had come to understand was his version of being moved. "You look perfect," he said. Not a compliment designed to reassure, just a fact delivered without decoration. She had believed him. The venue was grand in a way that was not self-conscious about it. High ceilings and long windows and chandeliers that treated light as something to be given generously. There were perhaps 200 people, the same world as the smaller gathering but more of it. More layers, more history between the people in the room. Clara had learned some of their names in the preceding weeks. She had done her own research, quietly and carefully, the same research instinct she applied to manuscripts and writers and everything she wanted to understand properly. She knew who mattered and how and why. She walked into the room with this knowledge sitting comfortably in her, not displayed, just present. For the first hour it went well. She moved through the room with Dante and without him, in the natural rhythm they had developed, comfortable in both modes. She had conversations that were real. She drank one glass of champagne slowly, and ate the small things the waiters brought around and felt, if not entirely at ease, then present and capable and unafraid. Then she heard the name, Victor Strand. She had come across it in her research. He was older than Dante, somewhere in his late 50s, gray at the temples and carrying the particular authority of a man who had been in a room's upper tier for so long that he had stopped noticing any other tier existed. He was significant in Dante's world in ways that were historical and financial and complicated. He was, in the delicate language of that world, someone whose opinion moved things. She was standing near the edge of the room, by one of the tall windows, in a brief moment between conversations, when Victor Strand appeared beside her. He was with two other men, both of whom she recognized from the smaller gathering weeks before. He looked at her with the careful, calibrated expression of a man performing pleasantness. "You are Dante's guest," he said. Not a question. "I'm with Dante, yes," she said. "I'm Clara." "Clara." He said the name as if testing its weight. "I understand you work in publishing. I'm a senior editor." "Books," he said, with a small sound in his voice that was not quite dismissal, but was comfortable in the neighborhood of it. "A long way from here." "Different world," she agreed pleasantly. "Same people, more or less." He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted very slightly. A recalculation. One of the men beside him, the younger one with a narrow face and dark hair, leaned in toward Victor with a murmur she was not meant to hear clearly, but which she heard anyway. "Remarkable choice," the man said, and the word remarkable was doing precisely the opposite of what it claimed. Victor did not respond. He was still looking at Clara with those recalculating eyes. She looked back at him. She was not afraid of Victor Strand. She understood who he was and what his opinion meant in this room. She also understood that she had spent 31 years being measured by people who had decided in advance that the measurement would come up short, and that she was done performing smallness for the comfort of those people. "It was nice to meet you," she said. Warm, clean, final. She moved away. She found Dante across the room in conversation with a man she did not know, and she joined them naturally, and the conversation moved and developed and she contributed to it from the genuine store of who she was, rather than from any position she was performing. But the evening was not done with her. An hour later, near the end of the formal part of the night, when the room had loosened slightly and the conversations had spread and mingled, she was standing with a woman named Ruth, Helen's counterpart in this group, a sharp and funny woman who had shown genuine warmth from the beginning. when she heard Victor Strand's voice from 2 groups away. Not directed at her, directed at someone beside him, but in the acoustic of the room, with the music paused between songs, the words carried. "She is not the type," Victor said. "Too soft for this. The wrong shape entirely." And then quieter but still audible. "The narrow-faced man. Dante will sort it out eventually." Ruth heard it too. Clara saw the slight compression of Ruth's mouth, the quick look in her direction. Clara set her champagne glass down on the table beside her. She turned. Dante was already moving. She had not signaled him. She had not looked for him. He had been on the other side of the room and he was already moving, cutting through the groups of people with the calm directness of a man who had decided something. He reached Victor Strand. The room did not go silent. That was not how these things worked in this world. But there was a perceptible shift, a rearranging of attention, a collective stilling, the way a room changes when something that matters is about to happen. Clara watched from where she was standing. Dante stopped beside Victor. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the older man with complete steadiness, and he spoke. She could not hear the exact words at this distance, but she heard the tone, and the tone was the most unambiguous thing she had ever heard. It was not aggressive. It was not theatrical. It was simply absolute. Victor Strand listened. His expression changed in a way she found very satisfying. Then Dante turned. He came back across the room. He came to her, directly, and he stood in front of her and looked at her face and said, in a voice that was only for her, "I want to say something to you." "Go ahead," she said. He held her gaze. "You are perfectly mine," he said. "Not a guest here, not a visitor, not something I am trying out. Mine, completely. And that is not a thing that is up for anyone else's assessment or opinion." She breathed. The room moved around them, conversations resuming, music beginning again, 200 people redistributing their attention to their own evenings. She stood in the middle of it and looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest. Not a small shift, not a polite rearrangement, but the kind of deep, tectonic movement of something that had been braced for a long time, finally being allowed to rest. She thought about the chair at the wedding. She thought about green fabric and a cracked plastic leg, and the sound of laughter sharpened to a point. She thought about a fence at the edge of a garden, and a man who stood in the dark without moving away. She thought about 3 months of dinners and conversations, and silences that were comfortable, and mornings that were good, and a city seen from an angle she had never had before. She thought about all the rooms where people had measured her and found her wanting, and she thought about the fact that she was standing here now, in this room, in this red dress, with this man looking at her as if she were the most complete thing in his world. She was not too heavy. She had never been too heavy. She had simply been in rooms too small to hold her. She reached up and touched his face, very briefly, with one hand. A quiet gesture, the kind that does not need an audience. "I know," she said. "I know I am." He looked at her. She looked back. Around them the gala moved on, voices rising, music lifting, 200 lives in temporary proximity, and in the middle of it all she stood, fully present, fully herself, not shrinking, and not bracing, and not performing smallness for anyone in the room. Just standing. Just Clara. Exactly the right amount. And the man beside her knew it better than anyone. He had known it since a garden fence and a quiet night, and a question that she had answered honestly for the first time in a long time. Not particularly. That was where it had started. Here, in this room, in this red dress, with her hand still carrying the warmth of his face, was where something else began. Something she did not have a name for yet. She suspected she would not need to name it. It already knew what it was.